Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
My darlings, I am doing another video on Missing 411. This one was a question on Quora. The person who answered is anonymous. But should they find this and wish to be acknowledged or wish me to take it down, please contact me and I would be glad to do either. But I love the information they put together for this. So, without further ado, my darlings, the question was, what do missing people who are later found describe they experienced during the time they were missing? What are their stories? Anonymous, January 26th, 2016. In the cases I know of, stories told by people who go missing and are found are not what you would expect. These stories may challenge your understanding of reality. Be warned. I included names. It's important that we are respectful and polite of people who go missing and are returned, and do not try to contact them so that they can live normal lives. They can come forward with their stories if they want to. Stories from children. Cuddled and comforted by a bear. Ida Mae Curtis's story. In 1868, a 3-year-old girl disappeared from her father's lumber camp in northern Michigan. After enlisting the help of a pair of professional hunters who happened on the hysterical search scene by chance, the men traced the little girl's feeble cries to a dense stand of brush. When the men advanced on the thicket, they saw what they said looked like a giant bear burst from it and run across the river, heading for the distant horizon. The men recovered the girl unharmed from the brush. She later told them that Mr. Wolf would not let her leave and had eaten her hat from right off her head, although he had also gathered berries and fed them to her. On the night of the July 2nd, 1955, Mrs. Curtis summoned her distraught older children, arrived just in time to see what she and the children said was a huge bear cradling her 2-year-old daughter, Ida Mae Curtis, in its front paws as it scurried off on 3 legs from their tent in the lumber camp at the wild Kootenai National Forest in Montana. On July 4th, after a search by 350 backwoodsmen in heavy rain, Ida was found, dry and safe, in a crudely built shelter across the river, just 300 yards from where she was taken. Ida would later relate to the best of a 2-year-old's ability, being cuddled and comforted by the bear during the time she was missing. The sheriff became so angry that he actually paid the Curtises 3 separate visits, demanding that they stop telling their story of a bear abducting and caring for their little girl. He told them, quote, "Quit telling that story. It could never happen. It didn't happen, and don't say it no more." The wolf ate my hat and fed me berries. Politis told this story in an interview he did on Paranormal Central in March 2014. To summarize, in the 1800s, a girl went missing while with her father. Similar situation, she was there and then not there. 2 hunters helped her father search. They called her name, no response, like all the cases. The following day, they are near a river and hear a girl's muffled voice and make their way there. They hear a huge splash, and out of the corner of their eye, they see a huge dark figure jumping into the river and swimming to the other side. They see the girl standing on a log. She's missing items of clothing. The father talks with her and asks, "Where's your hat?" The girl, "The wolf ate it." "Where's your gloves?" "The wolf ate it." Why didn't you call? Why didn't you say something when we called? He wouldn't let me. Did you get anything to eat? The wolf brought me berries in its hands. Paulides explains that this story was in several different newspapers, in 1783 or 1784, reprinted again in the 1920s. In this Missing 411 Eastern book, there are several stories of kids being taken by bears, bears that coddled kids, bears that fed the kids, but specifically, this girl said a wolf, and it was a giant wolf. Missing for 46 hours. The sun shined the whole time. Paulides told the story of Lillian Carney on Where Did the Road Go? On December 20th, 2014. A summary of the story. Lillian was from Masardis, Maine, which is 15 miles west of the Canadian border and surrounded by lakes, rivers, and ponds. 6 years old. She went missing August 8th, 1897 at noon. Lillian and her parents went blueberry picking. People go missing while picking berries is a theme in these cases. They were there for a short amount of time, and the parents said she just vanished. They searched for an hour, and they got some people in the area to help. By the following morning, there were 200 searchers there calling for Lillian. Paulides says that when the searchers are looking for someone, they call the person's name, say that they are their friend and that they're there to help. Paulides says that in Missing 411 cases, the searchers never get a response, which is strange if people are lost, cold, or hungry. On Tuesday, around 300 residents arrived to search, and at 10 a.m., a guy named Bert Poland, I don't know if that is spelled right, found her somewhere between 2 and 3 miles from where her parents last saw her. There wasn't much detail in the article about where they found her. While Lillian didn't say a lot, she made an interesting statement. The sun shined all the time while I was in the woods. Paulides says this is a weird thing for a 6-year-old to say. The weather was stated in the news article as being partly cloudy, and she'd spent 2 nights outside and was missing for 46 hours. The interviewer commented that she must have been referring to something like that, and said, while she described it as sunlight, it might not have been. He also said for the time period, you're not going to find an area like that with very bright artificial lights. The Lewiston Evening Journal published the story in the August 12, 1987 edition. That one, pausing to, that kind of leads into the dimensional fairy theory, if she was not, or it could have been artificial lights, but beings that look like robots. Paulides told this story in an interview with George Knapp on Coast to Coast AM. A summary. 3-year-old boy, John Doe, disappears from his parents in Mount Shasta along a creek river where people go fly fishing on October 1st, 2010 at 6:30. Paulides says people seem to go missing between 2:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. in the cases he has researched. Paulides said people say strange things happen in this area, that there are beings called Lemurians that live under the area, and Bigfoot and UFO sightings. Parents contact sheriff. A search starts. They don't find him. They find him 5 hours later at 11:30 p.m. at night, sitting in a thicket. He doesn't say anything. He's taken home. He's in a state of stunned disbelief. They talk to him and ask him what happened the next morning. He tells a story that he is taken into a cave and he thinks he is underground. He says he knows it's dark outside, but when in the cave I could see the entrance and it's light outside. He said he's with a woman who looks like his grandmother, and he thought it was his grandmother. In the cave, he saw other things in the cave that look like people, but they are robots and aren't moving. After a while, he figures out the woman isn't his grandmother, even though she is nice and polite with him. He concludes she is a robot. He said there was some unusual light coming from her head. She started to get pushy, took some of the sticky paper and put it on the ground, and asked him to defecate onto it. He said he didn't have to go, and she got mad. He said he saw small guns and things around the perimeter of the cave, and they had dust on them. The boy spent time with the grandmother the following weekend and told her story. The grandmother then tells Polites that 3 weeks before the boy disappeared, she and her husband were at the same creek where he went missing, spending the night. They woke in the middle of the night because the grandmother felt a pain at the base of her neck. Her husband looked at it, and there was a small bloody spot at the base of the neck. She didn't know if this was related to the boy's disappearance, but found it strange. The boy is now fine and has not disappeared since. It is the most unusual story Polites has heard about a boy going missing. There is another telling of the story of a forum called Reddit. Oh, we know that, don't we, my darlings? I couldn't find where it was sourced from, though apparently this story appeared in Polites' books. About 3 weeks after the incident, John Doe's grandmother said that her grandson told her that he didn't like his other Grandma Cappy. Cappy is the boy's name for Grandma Kathy. When she asked him to explain further, he said, sick, "Don't you remember when I was lost in the woods? The other Grandma Cappy grabbed me and took me to a creepy place. She's really a robot. It was a cave with spiders, and there were purses and guns. I was too scared, so I didn't touch anything. But when she climbed a ladder, the light made her look like a robot. There were other robots too, but they didn't move. She made me lay down to look at my tummy. Then she tried to get me to poop on a sticky paper, but I couldn't go. She told me that I'm from outer space, and they put me in my mommy's tummy. Then she took me back to the river and said to wait under a bush until someone found me. She also states that her grandson said, sick, she had your same hair, your feet, and even your face. That scared her deeply. The idea of some doppelganger taking on your own image to abduct her grandson. She says she got the impression that her grandson may have been talking about a hologram because of the way he described the light sparkling on the strange woman. His grandmother was horrified and called her son, the boy's father, who told her he had also heard the same story from the boy a few days ago. She admitted that she had probably written off her grandson's story to a child's overactive imagination if it wasn't for a strange experience that happened to her a year ago when she was camping in the same area near Fowler's Campground in McLeod, California. She claims she woke up one morning face down in the dirt, having been removed from her tent and sleeping bag, and she had a puncture wound on the back of her head. She said she felt violently ill that morning and felt strangely emotionless, so she thought she'd been bitten by a poisonous spider. She said she was with a friend who had been sleeping in a separate camper, and he also woke up with a bite on the back of his neck, and he felt ill as well. The only thing strange she'd recall was seeing red eyes shining through the trees and their flashlights the night before, which they thought was a deer. Stories from adults. Unwilling to talk about it. The case of Stephen Kubacki, who went missing for 15 months, then woke up in a field wearing different clothes. In February 1978, Stephen, a student at the time learning German, went missing in the Michigan area, USA, an area known as the Great Lakes Triangle, which is written about in a book by Jay Gorley that talks about the disappearances of hundreds of ships, boats, and aircrafts. Polides said it's a great book. Stephen said he was going to go skiing. They found his skis and his poles on the beach of the Lake Michigan and footprints on the ice leading up to the lake. They flew over it. The footprints appeared to stop. They found his backpack in the same general area. In May 5th, 1979, 15 months later, Stephen walked up to his father's door and said he didn't remember much. He woke up in Pittsville, 40 miles from his father's home, lying in a meadow wearing clothes that weren't his. He had a small satchel beside him with maps that weren't his. Where he woke up was 700 miles from Lake Michigan. Reporters asked him if he would talk to someone. He said he didn't need to because he didn't have any psychological problems. After 1983, Stephen got a master's in linguistics and a PhD in clinical psychology. Polides got in touch with him. Steve did not respond to his calls or emails. A woman felt a hand grab hers. I heard this on an interview on YouTube. I think it was an interview Polides did with Jeff Rains and Mia Pope. Polides mentions Jeff in the show intro. A woman in France was walking along a river in the late 1950s. She felt as though a force came over her, and she felt it grab her from behind. She could see dark-colored hands grab her up her chest and drag her from behind into a thorny bush area. She started to scream. She heard a voice above her say something. At about the time the weather started to change immediately to thunder and rain, the voice said something like, "Well, here you go," as if he were delivering her. Then all of a sudden it stopped, and she ran to a nearby farm. The farmer said he could see a large hand had grabbed her chest. There were red marks there. They called the police. The police wrote a report about it. I don't know the woman's name or the source of the story. Polides said someone told him about it. Other cases not mentioned in the Missing 411 books. Invisible Barrier. This was mentioned by Art Bell, the host of an interview Polides did in 2015. Art mentioned Patrick Harper sent him a story from an article he wrote for the Fortean Times magazine issue FT 141. A summary of the story. 19-year-old girl had not returned for supper after visiting a neighbor. Search parties sent out. The girl later turned up at the house and collapsed crying. She had made a detour to climb a fairy fort. It had a name, but I didn't catch it. The girl tried to leave the fort, but felt muscular jerk from within her body. Before she realized it, she was walking in the opposite direction. When she tried to get out again, she felt like there was an invisible barrier preventing her. Darkness fell, presumably nightfall, and she became desperate, afraid to stop following the encircled barrier. She could see and hear the search party, but they couldn't see or hear her. The barrier seemed to lift and she made her way home. Harper has a website and talks about something called demonic reality. I don't know how credible Harper is. The story sounds a little dramatized compared to Polides' matter-of-fact presentation. Unfamiliar surroundings. An article published on Huffington Post in 2013 by Roger Marsh mentions two men who read in one of Polides' books in this series wrote to report that they were walking on their family farm property. They were familiar with their entire lives and encountered rather odd circumstances. First, they said they realized that all sound had disappeared around them, the sounds of nature. Then they realized that although they were sure they were on the family property, they suddenly could not identify their surroundings. They soon walked out of what they felt was a portal and back into familiar grounds. 3-year-old helped by the, quote, big black man. This was apparently posted on the Phantoms and Monsters website. The Little Wanderer. Alice Rachel Peck, aged 3 and 4 months, wandered away from her home in Burn Valley Thursday, August 25th, 1898, in search of her mother, who went on an errand. The little girl traveled an old, unused bark road, climbing over high and very rough mountain, and there, worn out with hunger and without bonnet or shoes for 3 days and nights, had nothing to eat but a few huckleberries, while friends and neighbors were diligently searching for her or her remains. She was found on Sunday morning, August 28th, at 7:30 by William Bear, sound and well. She neither smiled nor cried as 200 voices rang out the glad tidings of great joy, 5 miles from her home in the mountains. While her parents were in great agony at home, they were soon relieved when hearing the many voices and trumpets proclaiming that the lost had been found. On the same morning the child was found, and in the same vicinity, from 8 until 11:30, 8 rattlers, 2 vipers, and 2 copperheads were killed. All returned happy, but some were very near worn out. The majority of those who participated in the child hunt saved their canes as relics of the day. Mark H. wrote in and said this. This is a copy of an old newspaper article. A friend posted this on a community Facebook page we belong. My brother-in-law had told me a longer version several years ago. The news clip seems shorter than his version. His grandmother was Alice's younger sister. The reporter makes it sound like a light-hearted adventure. They were picking berries with a group. Her mother left and went back to the house for some reason. When she came back, the group had thought that the girl had been with her mother. She had had her shoes and bonnet when last seen. The area hadn't changed much since then. It has basic Pennsylvania mountain terrain with enough dirt between the boulders and rocks to grow trees, and mountain laurel. You have to crawl under or walk atop it. Her uncle wasn't buying. She traveled to where they found her on her own. Alice was asked how she got there over those big rocks. She told him, quote, "The big black man helped her." And that's all she could tell him. If it had been a black man in that area back then, he would have been well known by the residents. Invited to dinner and stayed for the night. This was a story documented in the American Ethnological Annual Report for 1897-1908. The story takes place in a forested mounted setting, which would be just fine for ancient Ireland or Wales or Scotland. Not only did Wayford, Mooney's confidant, hear this from the experiencer, but had heard it previously from several second-hand sources, which is why he looked the fellow up for an interview. All of Wayford's sources say that this man was a truthful and hard-headed man. Here is what he was told. When he was 10 to 12 years old, he was practicing with a bow and arrow near the river and got tired of it. He sat on the riverbank, building a fish trap, and was piling up some stones to wall in the fish. A normal-looking stranger came up to him, remarked that this looked like hard work and that he should take a break. The boy was quite willing to do that, but he didn't know if the next offer, to come up the river and have dinner at the stranger's house, was the right thing to do. But customs were different in those days, and the boy went along. The house was fine and the people very friendly. He had a nice meal, and while doing so, a friend of his family arrived at the stranger's house, and that made him feel more at home. He played with the family's children, went to sleep, woke in the morning, had breakfast, and began to get started for home. He and the original gentleman began walking down a path between a cornfield on one side and a peach orchard on the other. Soon the trail connected with another one, and the man said, "Go by this trail to the ridge ahead. You'll come to the river road. That will take you straight home." And he turned and went back to his house and farm. The boy walked just a little ways towards the river and, in curiosity, turned and looked back. There was no peach orchard nor cornfield. There was no house nor trail. There was only the mountainside and the trees. He continued uneventfully back home, where he was greeted by many who had been looking for him. In explanation, he told his story. He saw the family friend who had visited that house also that evening, but the friend said, "No, I have been with everyone else looking for you." His family told him that no house was there, and that the family friend was an impersonation by the Noonan High. They told him that sometimes have been sounds of drumming coming from the mountainside, but had visited no men but the Noonan High. The Irish know all about what happened there, whether it's called the last sod or the world alongside. The boy had passed into a parallel world of the Noonan High, and just there passed out again. The story was found by Professor Michael Swords, who found the data in Ivan Sanderson's book collection. This is what Swords had to say about the find. Ivan Sanderson's had a very poor quality copy of several pages of James Mooney's Myths of the Cherokee from the Bureau of American Ethnology Annual Report for 1897-98. I don't know why I even bothered to squint away at the crummy document, but I'm glad that I did. What it was the field information gathered about a type of paranormal being, society of beings, who resemble old Celtic ideas of the Shay. Not the little people of fairy, but the full-size entities more like the Tuatha De Danann. I was surprised by both the tale told and the fact that Sanderson was even interested, as he showed little interest in such things elsewhere in the collection. Ivan didn't really like the paranormal that much. Maybe he thought that this tale hinted of something more like a lost tribe. Well, I'm very interested, even if Ivan is only lukewarm. The introduction to the story I'm going to tell shortly spoke of this race of magical, paranormal beings called the Noonhai. They were described as full-size persons, looking just like the local Native Americans, and mainly friendly and occasionally helpful. As they were described, I got more interested. They liked singing and dancing in the forests. Some were said to reside under ancient mounds. Whoa, just a minute, I thought. What's going on here? The Cherokee and the Celts aren't supposed to have made up the same myths. Then I read the story which had been collected. There it was, the characteristics of a tale about an actual encounter, rather than a dramatized folk wisdom tale around the campfire. The more that I find of this stuff, and it has been a walloping great amount of it, the less possible I believe that one can sustain that nothing paranormal is going on in these instances. How is the coincidence of these characteristics across the ocean possible, if not because they both arise from real underlying shared cause? The Cherokee even have their second and separate group of knee-high little people to go along with the 5+ footers. I will probably go to my grave all the way the fool in my belief in this all too infrequently manifested reality. They are one of the few things that I've not experienced and would like to do so, just for fun. I have to say that I echo Professor Swords' sentiments in this. I would like to encounter that as well, most definitely, and hopefully come back to tell about it. Hypnosis. Pilates said in an interview he did with George Knapp on Coast to Coast AM that it would be fascinating for people who have gone missing to use hypnosis to see what happened to them. He hasn't done it yet because some people contacted him early on and advised him to be careful, when you approach someone who has gone through an incident like going missing, because they can take what you're doing the wrong way and think you're trying to profit from their loss or injury, and that many people don't want to be talked to. Pilates said the stance they take is if people want to come to them, they will absolutely talk to them. Something positive. The Rubik's Cube and Spider-Man sunglasses. David Pilates' son, who helped with the documentary, told a story of what happened when they filmed this video about Jared Atadero years before the document. And there is a link there. Hopefully I will remember to put a card right here to watch this interview. You can hear the story David's son told in this interview. So if you're following along with this, there's a link. They saw it as spooky. I'll let you interpret it as you want to. I saw it as heartwarming. That's Jared leaving a message for his dad. I hope he got it. Followed by a number of footnotes. I'd like to add to this the toddler that went missing this last early winter in North Carolina, I believe, who was missing for 3 days and said he was kept warm by the bear. That seems to go along with many of these children's stories. That's nothing new. If you like these, let me know and I'll continue them. I know last week's might have been a little bit dry, but I think this one was very interesting with the various different disappearances throughout history. Let me know. If this is your work and you want credited or taken down, let me know. It was very well researched and put together. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin Case, Darren and Jennifer Daw, and Callist Enoch. If you want to be a Patreon supporter, I start at just $1 because I know how tough it is out there. And if you can't afford that, I love you anyway, my darlings. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.